사시 부키 주심에 도 Tramri Rablingji Nidegempati Sangye Jingdu Miteuwa Idro Kunamda Jila Chuparsho Jetsun Lama Dampa Kenam Kichu Kukala Kensei Chuzintri Jitar Tsampe Duje Zima Laza Gechurki Charpawabduso Idam Guru Randamandalakam Nirya Tayami. And then we'll continue with the 7-limb prayer on that same page, the back of the first base sheet. Gosum gupe gone chaktelo ngushami chu chu tri malubu tomene sadi tu tam chesha ke page wanam la jeirang korwa matum bardule june drola cheki korlo korwadam Da Shenge Nanjan Chu Chenpo. Okay, and then if you turn back one page to the front of the base sheet at the bottom, the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. Sangye Chodan Soki Chognam La Jongchu Bardu Dagni Kyapsuchi Dagi Chunyen Ki Pesonam Ki Drola Penchu Sangye Druparsho Sangye Chodan Soki Chognam La Jongchu Bardu Dagni Kyapsuchi Dagi Chunyen Ki Pesonam Ki Drola Penchu Sangye Druparsho Sangye Chodan Soki Chognam La Jongchu Bardu Dagni Kyapsuchi Dagi Chunyengi Pe Sonam Ki Drola Penchu Sangye Druparsh.
Not yet? There it is. Okay. There we go. Okay. So nice to be here again. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of talking at Kadampa Center in its various incarnations, the earlier locations and so forth. So it's nice to be here. Geshe-la has probably mentioned to you. Well, let me ask first of all, how many of you are generally have been taking the program all along? Okay, so there's a couple people that haven't been taking before. That's good. I wanted people to know that they're welcome to come. Geshe-la's probably said something like this in your earlier courses, but I remember one of my teachers, Geshe Jampa Tekchok, I don't know if he's ever been here, who was the abbot of Sera for some years. Geshe-la was one of our first teachers at Manjushri Institute many years ago, and he was teaching what at that time it was called the Geshe program before the Gelugpa Society decided that they weren't going to give us Westerners Geshe degrees if we studied in English. But anyway, Geshe Tekchok, in trying to encourage us to study, because a lot of people are more interested in so-called practice, and study seems something maybe not as important, sort of for intellectuals and something like that. Geshe-la said that there was a tradition, understanding in the monasteries that studying one of these kind of courses, like the Buddhist tenets or Low-Rig or mind and mental factors, was more meritorious, more beneficial than doing a Vajrasattva retreat. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do a Vajrasattva retreat. I just did a Vajrasattva retreat, but with understanding of the teachings and honing of your intellect through studying texts like this, there's a deeper experience of your meditation, of your practice later. So I'm very glad that some of you who haven't been following the program came today, and I hope that you'll continue to come. And just want to encourage the rest of you, even though there's sometimes difficulties and frustrations in studying this material, by studying subjects like this later, when you do study subjects like emptiness and other subjects about the Bodhisattva's deeds and so forth, there'll be certain facets of this understanding that you're getting now that will be useful at that time, and even allusions to things that you're learning now in those texts, like especially in Madhyamika. There'll be allusions to these various things, and you can feel a certain amount of contentment at that time of pleasure in having prepared yourself to understand more deeply. I just want to mention that. Is this on right? Should be more like this? Which way? Oh, like this. Ah, there we go. Okay, that makes sense. Do all of you have the text that is suggested for the course? No. It's access it online. It's on the online page. You can access it online if you have a computer. There you go. So, if you know how to use one, right? So maybe someone afterwards can get together and help print out for those people who don't have computers or know how to use them, like Don. This text is by a famous Gelugpa Geshe called Yeshe Gelsen, and the title in the translation that we have is A Necklace for Those of Clear Awareness, clearly revealing the modes of minds and mental factors. Basically, this is part of the subject that is studied in the monasteries in preparation to studying the Prajnaparamita and the Majjhimika and so forth, this particular subject matter is sometimes called low rig. Have you heard that? Has Geshe taught low rig before? Parts of low rig? He has. So you know what low rig? What does low rig mean? Just out of curiosity, do you know? You said he studied it. He's taught it before. Okay, gotcha. Is anyone? Lo is a Tibetan word that means awareness. Rik means knowing. So it means awareness and knowing. There's another spelling of Rik it sounds the same, but with an extra letter at the end, a sa at the end, that means ways. So sometimes some authors have called it the ways of knowing. So there are 7 ways of knowing, and I think that's what that part Geshe may have taught. That's what's called the epistemological part of Lorig. Do you know that word, epistemology? How we know that things, how we know that what we are perceiving is true or not. So that's talking about valid cognition and inference and doubt and all of these various kinds of mind. The other section that we're going to be studying of Lorig is this, what we might call the psychological side, the mind and mental factors. So here, there's a relationship between the two, and there's some overlap, but basically what we're going to be talking about is how to recognize the 51 mental factors and the primary minds that are associated with them. It's good to remember there are 51 mental factors. If people want to have little discussions and tests of yourself later. One second, I'll just finish my idea and I'll call on you if you have a question. There's 52 weeks a year, right? So it's not 52 mental factors. It's one less. 51 mental factors is the way you can remember. It's not 52. And we'll be talking in a little while how they're divided up, and that would be a good thing to sort of memorize right at the very beginning, how the 51 mental factors are divided up. And there's a question by, I think it's Wendy, right? Yes. Yeah.
My question was on the 51 mental factors, are they the same as in hi, George. Sorry. The 51 mental factors are the same as Abhidharma? Or they are different?
There's a Abhidharma that is what they call, what we in our text also is called the lower Abhidharma, which is from the Vaibhashika point of view, Hinayana point of view, or let's say Theravada point of view, in which case there's not exactly 51, there's like 48 and some other count. But generally in the Mahayana Abhidharma, the upper Abhidharma, we classify 51 mental factors.
Thank you.
Okay. So this has been, this text has been translated by various people over the years. Herbert Gunther translated this in his very idiosyncratic style. I don't know if any of you have read any of Herbert Gunther's translations. A little bit funny. There's some others also. I'm going to start to read a little bit here. I'm not going to read every single word in the text, but I'm going to read the introduction that comes at the very beginning of the text. The author wrote, "I prostrate and go for refuge at all times at the feet of the Holy Venerable Guru, who is inseparable from the protector Manjughosha. Please always take care of me with your great mercy." So Manjughosha, of course, means Manjushri, right? Manjushri is the aspect of the omniscient mind that realizes ultimate truth directly. So that particular facet of the enlightened mind is what we're imagining in this case, possibly also because Lama Tsongkhapa was recognized as an emanation of Manjushri. Right? when it says, I prostrate and go for refuge at all times, I remember Lama Yeshe used to translate what is the Tibetan that is translated here is all times, forever. You know, I go for refuge forever. So at all times sounds like, you know, I'm not going to be distracted this lifetime. It has that meaning too, but forever means future lifetimes. You know, whatever happens, I'm still taking refuge, still go to refuge to my guru. Maitreya, the future Buddha Maitreya, is, I'm not sure if we have a representation of Maitreya here, do we? Right there. Oh, it's a picture. On Maitreya's head is a little stupa. Do you see? Is it in that picture? That stupa is supposedly the stupa of Shakyamuni Buddha. So even though Maitreya achieved enlightenment, Guru Shakyamuni in previous time was the guru of Maitreya. But Maitreya achieved enlightenment before Shakyamuni, but still revered him forever. So that stupa represents Shakyamuni Buddha. So even if you become more realized than your guru, there's no fault in revering him or her forever. And then the text continues, you have completed the two collections through the force of exalted compassion. Do you know what the two collections are? Have you heard of the two collections? To achieve Buddhahood, we have to accumulate a great deal of virtuous karma, we could say merit. That brings about the physical form that the Buddha, the ability to emanate in various physical forms, the emanation body, Nirmanakaya, and the enjoyment body, the Sambhogakaya. The other collection is called the collection of wisdom or exalted wisdom. And that is what brings about the omniscient mind itself, which you can't see in any physical form. We can't actually perceive directly, even if we have clairvoyance, until we ourselves are a Buddha. So those two, that's what it's meant by you have completed the two collections. It means you are Buddha through you have completed the two collections through the force of exalted compassion, or through the force of compassion. You've eliminated obscuring darkness and know all phenomena, clarifying what you yourself have seen clarifying for migrating beings what you yourself have seen. I bow down to the unsurpassed refuge, Munindra, or here it says Lord Muni. That's an epithet of Shakyamuni Buddha. So the Lord of Munis. Muni is an Indian word, not money. Muni, that means a sage. Like we say Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni was called the sage of the Shakya clan. I think that name, many of the epithets of Buddha came about from events during his lifetime. Do you know how that name came about? Do you know? Shakyamuni? Yeah. His father was of the Shakya clan, and he was born as a prince and very special circumstances. When he was very little, during the spring plowing ceremony, he sat while others were taking part. The father was plowing the ground with the golden plow, the king, and all this sort of thing. And he sat under a tree in concentration for many, many hours. And they said, whoa, that son, he's a sage, he's a Muni. So he was called Shakyamuni from that point. At various times in his life, various events gave rise to various epithets. Think like Christ. Christ was not called Christ from the beginning, right? Okay. So there's first there's prostration to your guru and to Shakyamuni. Due to your earnest single-pointed love for migrating beings, you were renowned as Maitrinath. Here it says protector Maitri in all three times. To the regent of the conquerors, the protector Ajita, I pay homage with a mind of heartfelt respect. So this is paying homage to the future Buddha, Maitreya, the loving one, also called Maitrinath, the protector, Maitreya or Lord Maitri, the loving one. you were the regent of the conqueror. Do you know what that means? You know what a regent is? When a king is not yet of age, someone takes charge of the government until the king or queen comes. That's called a regent. When the Dalai Lama was young and had not yet taken over the reins of the Tibetan government and the religious hierarchy, there was a regent in Tibet. There was a lama who was, in charge of things. So the regent of the conqueror means Maitreya is in Tushita heaven now, acting as the regent for the, how do you say, the spreading of the Dharma future when he will come into the world. I pay homage with a mind of heartfelt respect. So that's to the future Buddha Maitreya. Then you have been predicted by the Sugata himself. The Sugata is another name for the Buddha. Sugata means one who has gone to bliss, or who is well gone. You have been predicted by the Buddha himself. You have clarified the excellent systems of the profound and extensive teachings, and are greatly renowned as the great trailblazers. I prostrate to the 6 ornaments and the two supreme ones of the southern continent, Jambu Dvipa. Jambu Dvipa is the name of the sort of this world system, or the southern continent. The 6 ornaments and the two supremes, you can see in the footnote there what they refer to. Essentially, these 8 beings are sometimes represented in tankas. I know at Deer Park, where I lived for the last 6-7 years, there was a set of tankas with Shakyamuni in the center, and then these 8 beings, the 6 ornaments and the two supremes, because they are the ones that are mainly the authors of the texts that they study in the Geshe program. And not just in the Gelugpa tradition and all the different traditions. Nagarjuna and Asanga, Aryadeva and Vasubandhu, and so forth. Dignaga and Dharmakirti, Gunaprabha, and who's the last one? Shakyaprabha, in terms of study of Vinaya. So this is this kind of prologue here is making homage to the gurus, to Shakyamuni Buddha, to Maitreya, and to the great pundits who taught these texts that we're studying, who realized them and had great, spiritual realizations. And then more contemporary to the author, in this land surrounded by snow mountains, that means Tibet, you cause the grove of the 1,000-petaled lotuses of the sutras, tantras, and their commentaries to bloom anew, and are worthy of praise equal to the sun, the conqueror. I bow down to the Lama protector Manju Gosha. So this is referring to Lama Tsongkhapa. Have you heard of Lama Tsongkhapa? Yeah, some of you have. Lama Tsongkhapa was the founder of the Gelugpa tradition, who is considered to be an emanation of Manjushri, or Manju Gosha. So that was, when was that? 100 years ago? 50 years ago? When? 600 years ago. Something like that, okay? A long time ago. Merely by seeing the light rays of your exalted activities, the eye of awareness, seeing the excellent path, is illumined. May the Venerable Guru, the light of the day maker, which means the sun, the light of the sun, always abide at the lotus stamens of my heart. So this is then finally to one's own personal guru, through whose explanations and whose activities, like Geshe-la's activities of kindness and Gat Lama Zopa Rinpoche activities of kindness and extensive activities, merely by thinking about that, seeing the light rays of those, the awareness to see the excellent path, Palan Rim, is illuminated. So, asking them to always abide in the center of our heart. And then finally, the author's admonition, although others will not benefit from a discourse by one such as me, for the sake of enhancing my mind's familiarity with the excellent explanations, and due to having been exhorted by others, requested by others, I shall write a little on the modes of minds and mental factors in accordance with the texts on knowledge, or Abhidharma. So Wendy's question, whether this was the same as Abhidharma, so this is, he's going to be quoting both the upper and lower dharma, Abhidharma about these minds and mental factors. So it's not as though Yeshe Gelsen doesn't know anything. You know, nowadays people might take someone at their word. He said, although others will not benefit from a discourse by one such as me. If you were to say that at a conference in California, some people might get up and walk out, right? Oh, yeah, okay, well, once when the great tutor of the Dalai Lama, Khepje Serkon Rinpoche, was teaching at Kopan, and he was at Kopan giving initiations. I was teaching a meditation course way back when, and I asked Rinpoche to come and give question and answer for the Westerners. And at the beginning, he came up and he said, I don't know why you asked me here. I'm just a simple monk. Maybe you were there one day. I don't know, or Don was there. I don't know. And he said, I don't, I'm just a simple monk. You are college educated. I don't know very much. I don't know what the benefit will be. And there were two people from San Francisco who actually got up and left. It's one of the great lamas of Tibet. So this is not false humility. This is a way of reminding ourselves, if great lamas speak in such a way about their own realizations, it's always good for us to be cautious and not be overconfident and say that we know things. This is the same kind of sentiment at the beginning of Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Vatara, when he says a similar kind of thing. For the sake of enhancing my mind's familiarity with the excellent explanations from the Abhidharma, and due to having been requested by others to write such a text, I shall write a little on the modes, the system of minds and mental factors in accordance with the text on Abhidharma. So then the text begins. And I'd like to read this because it'll give us a little feeling for the text. Intelligent beings who have in mind their welfare in future lives, not just merely this lifetime, not being content simply with acquiring food and clothing for the duration of this life. That's very much how we have been for many, many lifetimes. Whenever we're born as an animal or as a human, whatever, as a hungry ghost, just worrying about the present. Friends, oh, someone disrespected me. I need more food. I need more money. I need, more comfort. These little irritations. Not being content simply with acquiring food and clothing for the duration of this life, but those who have in mind their future welfare, future lives, thinking, what will become of me in future rebirths? Those people should wonder, should think, I have circled powerlessly, under the influence of karma, in the three realms of cyclic existence since beginningless time, continuously experiencing suffering. This is very much like the motivations when we take the Mahayana, the Mahayana precepts, and whenever we do, some kind of glance meditation on the stages of the path, just to remember our state. We've been in cyclic existence since beginningless time, continuously suffering. Even when we were kings and queens, even now when we have our condo and our Subaru. How many people have Subarus here? Anyone? Just a couple. Okay, not that many. Well, in Asheville, apparently that's the car you have to have. The bus that goes around, the tourist bus that goes around Asheville. There's a comedy tourist bus that goes around, and they serve beer on it, and they say if you drink the beer, every time you see a Subaru, you have to take a sip. But there's so many Subarus in Asheville that people they realize it when they were put on. So even when you have all of these good things, as we have understood from the Lanrim teachings, and as we'll talk here also, what we're actually experiencing is not real happiness. It's what the Buddha called contaminated happiness, which is of the nature of discomfort, is the nature of dukkha. Do you know that word, dukkha? Which means suffering, really. Some people don't like to, like some Theravada teachers and others don't like to translate it as suffering. They think that's too strong a word. They want to say, what do they say? Dissatisfactory. You know, that these feelings are dissatisfactory. But from the Buddhist point of view, Mahayana point of view, they're, you could say, without putting too fine a line on it, they are the nature of suffering. From the very moment we experience something that's pleasurable, it's not real pleasure, because all it does is displace one discomfort, replacing it with another. You know, when we have a lot of experience of heat in the sun, and we go into the cool air-conditioned room, the suffering of heat goes down, but the suffering of coolness goes up. And while it's a situation like that, the bigger one is still going down, the coolness has not yet exceeded in discomfort the discomfort of the heat. We call that pleasure. It's not real pleasure. It's just exchanging one suffering with another. It's what's called contaminated happiness. So I've circled powerlessly in the three realms of cyclic existence from beginningless time, continuously experiencing suffering, and obviously other obvious sufferings also. What is the root of this? If someone thinks that, having contemplated in this manner, you must come to understand that these sufferings of cyclic existence neither arise without a cause, causelessly. You know, what did it say? By chance. You know, there's a lot of people just think it's just luck or whatever. Or nor do they arise from a discordant cause, something which is opposite. Or you might say, people think they arise from, the happiness arises, or the suffering or whatever I experience arises from my own deeds. I worked hard, therefore I've earned this $1 million, and so forth. You might say, from a Buddhist perspective, that's a misunderstanding, because what you're doing this lifetime through your activities is simply providing a cooperative cause for other karmic seeds to ripen. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, if there are seeds already in the field, and you sprinkle water on that and you put fertilizer on that, you'll get some crops. And you might think, oh, the fertilizer and the water were the cause of those crops. It's just a condition. The seeds that were in the ground are necessary. They're not sufficient. You need to have the cooperative causes also. So these sufferings of samsara neither arise without cause nor from a discordant cause. Rather, they arise from their own causes, karma and delusions, actions and afflictions. So actions is how we translate the Sanskrit word karma. You've heard that word, right? Karma. Karma in Tibetan is lay. So, and afflictions is what we call klesha. Have you heard that word? Almost sounds like a girl's name. That would be funny if someone named their daughter Klesha. Klesha means disturbing state of mind, in Tibetan nyonmong. So when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, have you heard of the Four Noble Truths? Anyone have you heard of Four Noble Truths? Anyone not heard of the Four Noble Truths? The second noble truth, or truth for noble beings, people who've realized emptiness directly, what they see directly is that the source of suffering, the first noble truth is suffering, the truth of suffering. Second noble truth is the source or cause of suffering, and that is twofold: karma and klesha, actions and the afflictions or delusions that cause those actions. all of the experiences that we have, whether they be good or bad, arise from our karma that we've created in the past. Rarely does the karma that we create ripen in this lifetime. There's some very heavy karma that you may create as a youth that may ripen when you're older, but generally there's no such thing as instant karma. I sock Don, and then Don socks me back, and you say, instant karma, George. By socking him, I've created a cooperative condition for some karma that I've created in the past to be socked back. You follow what I'm saying? So all of these sufferings of cyclic existence arise from their own causes, karma and klesha, actions and afflictions. Nagarjuna, the great protector Nagarjuna, says in the Precious Garland, as long as the aggregates are misconceived, that means as long as one perceives form, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousness to be truly existent. Those are the 5 aggregates, right? As long as you misconceive them to be truly existent or inherently existent, there will be the conception of an I, of a self. When there's a conception of a self, there is also action. As long as you're grasping that there's an inherently existent self, that's something we'll be talking a lot about when we talk about ignorance. As long as you have that sense, you're going to create contaminated actions. Even the Buddhists create actions, but those actions are called exalted activities. They're not the same as our contaminated actions. And due to these contaminated actions, which just says action here, there is rebirth. So we circle in cyclic existence because of the basic cause is not just the actions, but what's the cause of the actions? The principal delusion, the principal klesha, is apprehending the self of phenomena and a self of persons, believing, misapprehending ignorance. When we talk about ignorance, we'll talk from the Mahayana point of view. Ignorance is not simply not knowing. Ignorance is, you might say, proactive, perceiving in a wrong way something. Grasping that there is a findable self somewhere back there in your mind or somewhere in your body that has been offended or that needs to be stroked or petted or needs to be loved or needs to be pampered or gone to the spa or taken care of or whatever. When you recognize in your meditation the falsity of that, the vacuity of that self that you've been believing since beginningless time, is like a revelation, it said. Like everything looks much easier to bear. There's not so much urgency in trying to right wrongs that someone has wronged you, or there's not so much urgency of becoming famous or experiencing all of these pleasures for this imaginary self. And also Nagarjuna said in another text, the previous one was a quotation from the Ratnavali, I guess it's called. Yeah, Raja Parikarta Ratnavali. Also from his treatise on the Middle Way. The root of cyclic existence is compositional actions. Basically, that means, when we talk about the 12 links, have some of you studied the 12 links? What's the first link? Good. Ignorance. Marikpa or avidya. What's the second link? Oh. You're waiting for Shankar to come. You can see if you can beat him to the punch. He's trying to think. No. What is it? No, not name and form. What is it? it's what's being translated here as compositional actions. So it's duce. Actually, it just means composition. What it means is like a potter in the tankas that show the 12 links in some kind of pictorial form. It's often a potter making pots, composing, making. So due to ignorance, we compose, or here's his compositional actions. We compose actions. We create karma. The root of cyclic existence is compositional actions. Therefore, the wise do not create compositional actions, karma. Hence, the unwise are creators of karma. The wise are not, because of seeing the way things actually exist. Thusness. This word thusness is a synonym of ultimate reality. Shunyata, the emptiness of phenomena. Thusness. Okay, so because of not realizing emptiness, not realizing thusness, we create karma, and that causes us to circle in cyclic existence. Aryadeva, here it says Acharya Aryadeva. Aryadeva was a disciple, direct disciple of Nagarjuna, says this in his treatise on the 400 stanzas. The consciousness that is the seed of cyclic existence has objects as its objects of activity. I was trying to find this quotation to see if I could elucidate that a little bit more. I'll have to look and tell you a little bit more later. But I think what this is saying is that the consciousness that is the seed of cyclic existence, what that consciousness is an ignorance. That's what brings about cyclic existence, the continuity of cyclic existence. It has truly existent objects as its field of experience. That ignorance is thinking that there are truly existent objects. That's what it's conceiving. And then Acharya Chandrakirti says in the Madhyamika Vatara, the very diverse worlds of sentient beings and their environments are established by the mind itself. It is taught that all migrating beings, without exception, are born from actions. So these are the great pundits of the past talking about, so all of the worlds of sentient beings, animal world, the Preta world, the hell realms, the human realms, the various, the cosmos and so forth, come about, the worlds of sentient beings and their environments, that means the sentient beings themselves, how they appear, and their environments that they find themselves in, the world and so forth, are established, brought about by the mind itself. They're brought about by karma that sentient beings have created in the past, collective karma, to experience certain environments and to experience their own individual experiences within those. It is taught that all migrating beings, all sentient beings, without exception, are born as a result of actions, as a result of karma. Vasubandhu, who is the brother of Asanga, and these two brothers, one of them wrote what we commonly call the upper Abhidharma, the Abhidharma Samuccaya, that was a Sangha. Have you heard this before? And Vasubandhu, his younger brother, wrote the Abhidharma Kosha, which is called the lower Abhidharma, because it's from the point of view of the Vaibhashika school of the Hinayana. Anyway, he says the various worlds are produced from karma. And also in another stanza, the root of cyclic existence is the six, I wonder if you should say are, the six subtle increasers. What that means is the six delusions, six root delusions. In the Abhidharma, they're called the subtle increasers. Many such statements have been taught. Likewise, in Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara, another epithet of the Buddha, the propounder of truth, has taught that in this way all fears and the immeasurable sufferings arise from the mind. Yeah, really. All of our fears and sufferings arise from the mind. You might say, well, what about the experience of the physical aches and pains that I have, or this life-threatening disease, or the torment of being impoverished or having to declare bankruptcy or whatever? How is that created by the mind? That's real, that's outside. All of these fears are created by your mind. When you realize selflessness and emptiness, it's said that these fears go away. It doesn't mean that there's not still something outside happening. It's not as though the world suddenly disappears, but the experience of fear and suffering goes away. Shantideva also says, those who do not understand the secret of the mind, the great objective of the Dharma, those people wander aimlessly even though they wish to attain happiness. Even though they wish to attain happiness and destroy suffering, they wander aimlessly. So everyone wants to have happiness and to be free of suffering, but most people do just the opposite. Although they think their actions, cheating and conniving and not being honest with themselves or others, and even those are gross examples of misconduct, but even things that we think of as being quite good, working hard and so forth, that those will bring about happiness and end our suffering. Our actions generally, because they're not conjoined with the Dharma, create negative karma, which is a cause of suffering. So we don't even attain happiness, and we create the causes of suffering rather than attaining happiness and destroying suffering. Therefore, Shantideva says, I should hold well and guard well this mind of mine, my mind. Physical suffering, mental unhappiness, the various kinds of fears, as well as separation from what one desires, arise from committing misdeeds. When we talk about suffering in the stages of the path of Lan Rim, there are various enumerations of suffering. There's the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, the 3 sufferings. In the enumeration of the 8 sufferings, there is, we say, encountering that which is unpleasant, separating from what's pleasant of the 8, and never finding what you wish. Those are 3 of the 8. So this is relating a little bit to that. I find that very, very useful, the meditation on these various kinds of suffering, because when suffering occurs to us, rather than thinking, excuse me, this is something I don't need, this is something I don't deserve, while we're in cyclic existence, this is the very nature of cyclic existence, right? To encounter suffering, to encounter what's unpleasant, to be separated from what's pleasant. You met someone, nice relationship, you thought it was going to be pleasant, and then it turns into unpleasant, vinegar or whatever. That's just that's the nature of cyclic existence. And never finding, even for a whole lifetime, what our heart yearns for. We find substitutes and so forth. Nothing unusual. That's the nature of cyclic existence. While we're in cyclic existence, that's what we're in store for. That's what's in store for us. So a good reason to develop the wish to escape from cyclic existence. You're never going to find what you long for in cyclic existence. Physical suffering, mental unhappiness, the various kinds of fear, as well as separation from what one desires, arise from committing misdeeds. by performing virtues intended in the mind, motivated by the mind, wherever I go, due to those merits, I shall be honored with the excellences that are their results. Okay, I won't read any more of that quotation. And so the text continues, just as it has been said above, all of cyclic existence, the environment and its inhabitants, arises through the force of its own causes, karma and klesha, actions and afflictions. This has been taught not just once, but again and again in the sutras and tantras, as well as their commentaries. Sometimes when I've talked, especially in Theravada meditation groups, the American version of mindfulness meditation, often people are led to believe they don't have to believe what the Buddha taught. You know, that the Buddha said you don't have to believe what I said. And they a lot of them tend to not believe reincarnation or karma. Oh, you know, that doesn't fit with me. I just do mindfulness meditation. But it's all of cyclic existence, the environment and its inhabitants arise through the force of actions and afflictions. Karma, all of it arises from karma and affliction. So if we want to consider ourselves Buddhists that are practicing taking refuge in the Buddha, what we're taking refuge from is from suffering. And so we have to understand the causes of suffering. And that's one reason for studying mind and mental factors, because all of it comes back. Karma is created by the mind, by the delusions and so forth. This has been taught not just once, but again and again in the sutras and tantras, as well as their commentaries. Likewise, it has been taught that all the excellent qualities of the paths and grounds of the three vehicles, that means when we talk about the paths, it doesn't mean physical paths, but mental pathways that bring us to our destination. Those are called lam, like we say, lan rim, the stages of the path. And the grounds, or bhumis, are levels of realization also within that. All of the paths and grounds of the three vehicles, do you know the three vehicles? Subaru, Cadillac, Chevrolet, right? Oh, I'm sorry, what was it? Mahayana? Do you agree with what Shankar says? Mahayana, the great vehicle, Hinayana, the lesser vehicle or inferior vehicle, and the Vajrayana. This might be sometimes you find that, but generally in the sutras and so forth, what we talk about the three vehicles, we talk about the vehicle of the hearers, the Shravakayana, then the Pratyeka Buddhayana, the vehicle of the solitary realizers, and the Mahayana. The Mahayana has both the Bodhisattva, if you sort of branch off like this. This looks like some mudra, right? So this is the Mahayana. So that has Bodhisattvayana and Tantrayana. So that's what's all of the stages of the hearers, solitary realizers, bodhisattvas, and so forth, and as well as the resultant Buddha field, exalted bodies of the Buddha, lifespan, deeds, as well as the exalted activities, arise solely from their own causes, wholesome, virtuous minds. So not only do we have to recognize the klesha, the deluded mental factors, we also have to recognize what are virtuous minds. So of the 51 mental factors, does anyone know off the top of their mind, although it doesn't exhaust all virtuous mental factors, how many of those 51 mental factors are said to be virtuous? Do you know? I forgot your name, the gentleman. You, yeah. Patrick, yeah. Do you know how many of the 51 are virtuous? There are 11 virtuous mental factors. It doesn't mean that's that's the only virtuous minds. They are the representative major ones. How many of the mental factors are klesha, that is disturbing? Because the mental factors are not synonymous with klesha. Some of them are kleshas, delusions, afflictions. Some of them are virtuous, 11 are virtuous. Some of them are changeable and so forth. Do you know how many are, oh, Wendy knows. 38.
11 are virtuous. I thought it was 10. 2 are neutral, like sleeping and something or other. And 38 of them are.
Not in this enumeration. Were you going to? Ah, okay. So generally we say there are, how many root delusions are there? Have you heard? Root afflictions. 6 root afflictions. We're going to be talking about those in detail over time. And there are 20 secondary afflictions, so 26. Okay. So we have to know what are virtuous and what are non-virtuous and so forth. Therefore, the root of all cyclic existence and nirvana is established to be the mind itself. So the root of cyclic existence is ignorance, and the root of nirvana and enlightenment is the wisdom that realizes emptiness, conjoined with the mind of bodhicitta that brings about the accumulation of the two collections, collection of merit and collection of wisdom. Hence, it is of utmost importance to understand the system, the modes of minds and mental factors. Thus, here, I shall compose a brief presentation on minds and mental factors. This is 2 parts: the individual entities and divisions of mind and mental factors, and a summary of the salient points in their application of practice. Okay, so we're beginning the text. How are we doing for time? What is a... Got 15 minutes, okay.
Well, we can go longer.
Okay, oh no, I just... Do you take a break at all? Anyone? We don't take a break? If Wendy needs a break, she can go. No one else can go. She's an old timer. Very timer. Okay, so we're going to begin with the individual entities and divisions of mind and mental factors. So when it says entities, generally what it means is nature or definition. You know, the defining characteristics of something. When it, in these kind of philosophical texts, when it says the entity of something, kind of means the nature or its defining characteristic, how it's defined, how you can recognize something. So there are 2 parts, the explanation of minds and the explanation of mental factors. So first of all, minds. What's the difference between mind and mental factors? Do you know either the Tibetan or Sanskrit word for mind and mental factors? Words? Anyone know? What's your name in the purple? Sheila, do you? Yeah. Is he talking to me? No. Anyone know? Don, do you know? No, mind and mental factors. Mind is what in Sanskrit is chitta. Chitta. Like bodhicitta. You know the word bodhicitta, right? So that's chitta is mind. Kaita is the word for mental factor, that which has arisen from the mind, mental factor. So in Tibetan, the words are sem, S-E-M, there's an S in the end that's silent, sem, and mental factors is sem jung. Jung means arisen. Sem le jungwa, arisen from the mind. So we're going to be talking about those 2 things. When we talk about sem or chitta, mind, what we're talking about is the nature of our, let's say, our 6 consciousnesses. Its ability to simply know the perceptual fields. That's called primary consciousness. Primary consciousness, as opposed to mental factors. Okay? Mental factors are not something, a different nature than the mind. Let's say if we imagine some vibrating gelatinous bulge up here, that's the mind, okay? The mental factors are not something separate from that. They are the same nature of the mind, but the mental factors have a different function. The mental factors are, as you look at that, let's say if this thing is undulating, you might say just the big thing here is the mind, and the undulations on it are like the mental factors, like the waves on the ocean. Ocean is like the mind, and the undulations on it are like the mental factors. One, just as a first pass. We're going to go into more detail. So here it says, regarding the difference between a mind and a mental factor. A text by Maitreya. You know, Maitreya is the future Buddha. So it's said that a Sangha, you know the story, right? A Sangha went up to, after doing a long 6-year meditation retreat, never having even good dreams, he finally perceived Maitreya. And long story, you've probably heard the story many times, but anyway, he was brought to Tushita heaven, where he remained for a couple of nights in Tushita, which was 50 years on earth, and Maitreya taught him 5 texts of Maitreya, great texts, one of which is this one, Madhyanta Vibhagna. It was one of the first texts that Lama Yeshe taught us at Kopan. Were you there, Don, when Lama Yeshe began teaching? Utanamche it was called. Remember, John Landau translated a little bit the root text with Lama. So that was one of the, Wendy was there, so it was one of the first texts. In that text, he says, that which sees an object is a primary consciousness. That which sees its attributes is a mental factor. So what that means is, let's say our eye consciousness is an example. Eye consciousness has both a primary aspect to it, what we call primary or root consciousness, and mental factors within it. That eye consciousness, simply perceiving the visual field, which includes shapes and colors, that is the primary eye consciousness. Within that, there are various functions of the consciousness to discriminate. The ability, not just simply seeing shapes and colors, but to discriminate blue and yellow and green and red flags up there, not necessarily naming them, just the ability of the eye consciousness without conception, without thinking about it, to see not everything is just one homogeneous field, but to be able to discriminate things. That's a mental factor. Within the eye consciousness, there's also feeling or sensation. It's not the sensation that comes in the mental consciousness when you see a handsome man or a beautiful woman and you think, what did they say? Eye candy or something like that, right? That's arising in the mental consciousness. There is some kind of feeling in the eye consciousness. I think that might be a good exercise for you to see as we talk more about this, whether you can differentiate feeling in your eye consciousness. You think you can? Okay, I'm not sure. Maybe very subtle. Ear consciousness, feeling. So ear consciousness knows sounds. That's the primary consciousness. The mental factors of ear consciousness has discrimination, being able to differentiate between different sounds, and let's say feeling, among other things, or other mental factors also. When you scratch a blackboard with your fingernails, would that be an experience of an unpleasant sound? Or would an unpleasant sound be listening to, I'm not sure what kind of music you don't like. I was going to say rap music or something. What's the worst kind of music? That heavy metal. Or for some of us, what's the kind of thing they play in the elevators? Music. Yeah. That more is an intellectual feeling, that, oh man, or Beethoven, oh, this is so wonderful, Mozart or something, that's usually intellectual pleasure, mental pleasure. The pleasure or unpleasant or pleasant feeling of the ear consciousness is something a little different than what we're familiar with. When you get to nose consciousness, it becomes more easy to differentiate. There are some odors that we perceive as pleasant that create within the nose consciousness a pleasant feeling, and some, like perfumes and flowers and so forth, some that are unpleasant, musty smell or body odor or something like that, or garbage and so forth. Taste, more easily, even more gross, very clear. There are pleasant feelings within the tongue consciousness. Tongue consciousness mainly knows tastes, but within the tongue consciousness, the factor of being able to differentiate tastes, to separate, to recognize that there are different tastes, and to, let's say, have a feeling of pleasant and unpleasant. Those are mental factors. Okay, so it's the same thing with all of the consciousnesses. That which sees an object, the primary perceptual field is a primary consciousness. That which sees its attributes, knows attributes of that perceptual field, is a mental factor. So this definition, that which sees the object is the primary consciousness. Yeah, when you get your text, says I'm reading directly from the text. That which sees an object is a primary consciousness. And I added a couple extra words. That which sees the mere presence of the perceptual field, without differentiating anything about it, just knowing that. That is a primary consciousness. And within that consciousness, the ability then to differentiate or to experience feeling, to be motivated to move the consciousness to one object to another, those are all mental factors within that consciousness. That which sees the attributes. Vasubandhu's Abhidharma Kosha says primary consciousness knows individually. And I think what this means is there are 6 primary consciousnesses. There's a primary consciousness of the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, nose, taste, tactile primary consciousness. That also, basically tactile consciousness knows various things like smoothness, roughness, heat and cold. It knows it can differentiate those things. It knows the perceptual field, and within it, tactile consciousness for human beings, the desire realm, is one of the major motivators. The feeling within that is one of the major motivators for the delusions. Sexual pleasure is usually tactile, although there's a mental component also, in wanting to be loved and sharing love and so forth. But a lot of just the physical pleasure, say the meat and potatoes of sexual pleasure, is tactile within the tactile consciousness. Or feeling pleasant, smooth clothes rather than rough. What are the burlap sack clothes? What do they call that? What are the Christian sackcloth? You want to have pleasant feeling within that. So so the quotation, I think, from Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu's text, is saying that there are 6 individual primary consciousnesses. And the text continues, just as has been said above, that which knows the mere entity of an object, just the presence of an object without differentiating anything about it, is called a mind. Or mind here, sem, or chitta, means primary consciousness. It's synonymous. Mind and primary consciousness mean the same thing. Although we might want to quibble about the use of the words, that's how we're translating the words as mind. That which, taking observation of the very object as its basis, let's say the mind, the primary consciousness, visual consciousness, perceives the cup, just the presence of the cup, that which, taking the cup as its basis, engages the object by means of other attributes. Here it says isolates. You can forget about that for the time being. That which engages the object by means of other attributes, such as its function, is called the mental factor. It is just as has been said by Gyaltsab. Gyaltsab was one of the two disciples of Lama Tsongkhapa. There are statues here of Lama Tsongkhapa, and which one is Gyaltsab? On Lama Tsongkhapa's right? You sure? Yeah. The one on your left, that may, as Shankar said, on Lama Tsongkhapa's right, with grayer hair, more compassionate looking eyes, Gyaltsab. The other one is whom? Kedrub with the, he's more the tantric, wrathful aspect. A little bit younger than Gyaltsab, not that much, but anyway, that's why Gyaltsab. So Gyaltsab, or Gyaltsab here, it says the omniscient Gyaltsab says in his explanation, the Abhidharma Kosha, a main mind is another synonym of mind. So we have mind, citta, primary mind, main mind, these are all synonymous, such as a sense consciousness apprehending form, like a sense consciousness apprehending form would be an eye consciousness apprehending the shape and color, or an ear consciousness apprehending sound, or a nose consciousness apprehending an odor, a tongue consciousness apprehending taste, and a tactile consciousness apprehending objects of touch. Let's say a main mind, such as a sense consciousness apprehending form, is explained to know individually its object. So that means eye consciousness. Can an eye consciousness know sounds? Generally, no. There's examples of the great lamas of the past who had high psychic powers, who were able, even when they were blind, they were able to read their text with their fingertips, not by braille, but by But generally, we can't see, we can't hear with our eyes, we can't taste or smell with our eyes, we can't taste with our nose, although it's involved in the experience of taste and so forth. They know their own things individually. Just so, such a main mind does not depend on an ascertaining consciousness being produced. Okay, what is an ascertaining consciousness? That would come in the other part of low rig. And you've studied the other part of low rig, so I'll ask Donna, what's an ascertaining consciousness? Is it coming? No, okay, it's blocked somewhere. So an ascertaining consciousness means one in which you have realized the object, what it is. A primary consciousness doesn't have to depend on that. It just knows the mere, doesn't have to know this is a cup. It just sees the shape and form. It doesn't depend on ascertaining, having realized it as a cup. It's just so, such a main mind does not depend on an ascertaining consciousness being produced. Rather, it is distinguished by merely observing form, just knowing the individual form of that consciousness, whether it be visual form or auditory form or what's this one called? Olfactory form, gustatory form, tactile form. One should know the mental factors in its retinue by way of these various things. So by its retinue means this: a mental, primary consciousness has within it various mental factors as part of it. Those are considered to be its retinue. Like a king or queen has a retinue that always go with them. So this is a good way of, it's sometimes used as an example. The primary mind is like the king or queen, and the mental factors are like their retinue. They're never separated. Although in reality, you could, one of the bridesmaids or the queen's maids or the king's ministers may stay behind, but generally they're always together. Okay, so that's just an analogy. Here, mind and mental factors are never separated. You can't have a mental factor somewhere else other than the nature of the mind. They are of the same nature. So one should know the mental factors in the retinue of a main mind by way of each of their various functions. So that's what we're going to be studying about the mental factors, their functions, such as having taken that observation of form as the basis, moving the mind toward it. So what that means is, this would mean the mental factor intention. Having the main mind having taken this as its objects of observation, just the mere presence of the color and shape of this, then that the mental factor within that called intention, which is the main cause of karma, moving the attention, moving the mind toward that object. It doesn't mean that the mind moves from the eye out here toward the object, but sort of focuses on it, pays attention to it, and so forth. That would be an example of one should know the mental factors in its retinue by way of each of their various functions. So one of the functions is moving the mind toward an object, and one should know the mental factors in the retinue of a main mind by way of each of their various attributes. A lot of courses, mindfulness, meditation, and so forth. Mindfulness, what's the Pali word for mindfulness? Sati, I think they say satipatthana, close placement of mindfulness. Have you heard of satipatthana courses in India and so forth? In Sanskrit, the word is smriti. I sometimes joke that Pali is like John Kennedy trying to pronounce Sanskrit. Instead of saying karma in Pali, it's kama. You don't get it, do you? It's like John Kennedy, pak the ka and the ha vidyad. Right? Do you get it now? Yeah. So instead of karma in Pali, which was one of the colloquial, they call prakrits, local languages at the time of the Buddha, the simplified, distinct, different conjunct consonants like RM, like karma, simplified to K-A-M-M-A, karma. So like easier to say rather than twisting the tongue and say karma. And not instead of dharma was, what is it in Pali? Dhamma, you've heard, yeah, different things like that. So in Pali, the mindfulness is sati instead of smriti in Sanskrit. So smriti is mindfulness when we talk about these mental factors. Therefore, a main mind is a knower distinguished by mere observation of the object itself and does not need to be posited in terms of other attributes. A mental factor is a knower that, taking the observation of that very object as its basis, engages the object by means of, let's say, other attributes. Here it says isolates of other attributes. That's something we can go into later when we got more time. Just by, rather than knowing just the mere presence of the object, knows about, in moving the mind toward it, feeling it, keeping it in mind, not forgetting it, and so forth. Which was the first sentence? A main mind, that means this just mind, primary mind, is a knower, something that knows its subject, that is distinguished by the mere observation of the object itself, its object, just knowing the perceptual field merely. Whereas the mental factors within that main mind are distinguished by taking that observation of the main mind, let's say shape and color or sound or whatever, as its basis, and then engaging that object by means of other attributes, color, shape, and not forgetting it, moving mind toward it, feeling, experiencing it, not forgetting it, and so forth. Yeah, Wendy.
It's my experience in meditation that there is perception before there is identity. So it's my experience in meditation that there is perception of the object before there's identification of the object. And so I'm wondering,
the
identification is ascertaining consciousness, but it's not the primary consciousness to show?
What was it? To show?
Oh,
what did you say?
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We perceive something, and then when we identify it, that would be probably related with the mental factor called discrimination, which when we're talking about the mental factors, first one is going to be feeling or sensation. Mm-hmm. Second one is discrimination. Discrimination, I said, in the bare primary consciousness, there are two kinds of discrimination. One is simply having the ability to see things distinctly, not all mushed together, to discriminate. And also within the mental consciousness, it's the basis for giving names and identifying, oh, that's Wendy, that's Don, that's Shanka, or that's a cup, that's a rose. So that function of identifying and so forth is a result of a mental factor.
The third thing that happens is then there is a comprehension of quality. So there's perception of the object, identification of the object, and then there seems to become identification of qualities of the object.
It could be that is related to the experience of feeling. So, you think, oh, that's good, because you have a good feeling about it, or you experience it pleasantly. But anyway, I'll take one more question, and then I just want to finish this section so Shanka is not, this gentleman back there.
Those are mental factors?
Yeah. Those are
but not a primary consciousness.
Those are not primary consciousness, yeah.
Just quickly, does mind in itself, primary mind, does that require an object?
Primary mind requires something that it's perceiving, a perceptual field. So there's a debate about that sometimes, but generally Lama Tsongkhapa's position says any mind itself, whether it be primary mind or mental factors, always have some object. You might just say, oh, I was just spacing out, I wasn't thinking about anything, but there was something that your mind was perceiving at that time. And finally, this young lady. Okay, he's going to get fast legs. Yeah.
I had a question about how are you defining consciousness? Eye consciousness, nose consciousness.
How is it defined in Buddhism? Is that I don't have my own personal definition, but how it's defined in Buddhism is an interesting question. So generally, in the other subject of the other part of this subject of Lorig, that epistemological side, so they talk more about what knowing means. A knower or a consciousness is that which is a consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. Okay, so what that means is there's certain things that are clear, like crystal and water and so forth. It's not talking about that clarity. It's talking about a certain lucidity of our conscious phenomena that is able to reflect reflect whatever comes into the perceptual field, to experience comes into the perceptual field without effort. Like, for instance, a mirror is clear if it's cleaned off, it's not dusty, and you can see a reflection in it without any effort. If you put the cup or flower in front of the mirror, it will be reflected within that. So that's kind of talking about when we talk about consciousness being that which is clear and knowing. There's a basic definition in Lorig. Shepa Selshing Rikpa. Selwa means clear. We talk about the clarity of the mind. Rikpa means knowing. So it's not simply, let's say, the sense bases, like an eyeball. You take an eyeball from a dead body, and you might say, oh, look, it's still on the retinue, this thing is still reflected back there. It's not talking about that only. And in fact, that's not the clarity. The clarity is the clarity of the consciousness, not of the sense organ. But it has to, the quality of consciousness is to know or to experience the object. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's something to start to think about. What is consciousness? You can scan your various consciousness: eye, ear, nose, taste, tongue, tactile, and mental consciousness of a different continuity. It is clear in that it is, although sometimes the mind might not seem clear, it might seem like so many things, so much chaos going on in the mind, or so much tension, or there's no space. Actually, behind all of that, just like the mirror, the mirror could be reflecting some scene from a war movie or something like that, but the mirror itself is not at all affected by that. The mirror is still clear. And when we do different kinds of meditation on the nature of the mind, letting go, even when the mind is so uptight with so many worries, once you're familiar with how to meditate on the mind, just looking at its basic clarity, focusing on that rather than the objects within it, rather than on the reflections within that clarity, let's say if you're talking about the mental consciousness, all of those other thoughts can begin to subside because you're not giving them the energy to continue. You're not focused. If you start to worry about something, it gets more and more. If you take your attention away from that by focusing on the clarity of the mind, all of those disturbing things can begin to dissipate, be subdued, and you can focus on the clarity of the mind. That's sometimes called Mahamudra meditation. We sometimes meditate on the clear light nature of the mind. Okay, so I want to give time to Shankar. I probably went over a little. Is it?
No, that's fine. The only thing I was going to say is normally at the end, Yeshua gives us a couple of things to discuss in a discussion group and kind of like homework for the next.
Okay, sure. And so what's going to happen now? Until 9:15 we have discussion, or what?
Yeah. Well, no, just us.
Oh, okay. So what I'd like you to do is to go through this text and find the list, where is it, of the 51 mental factors, and where it's talking not to memorize all the 51 mental factors, but there it is in this text that we have on page 14, about halfway, just about a third of the way down. It says, when these mental factors are divided, there are 51. Remember, one less than the weeks of a year. 5 omnipresent mental factors, such as feeling and so forth. 5 object ascertaining mental factors, such as aspiration and so forth. 11 virtuous mental factors, such as faith and so forth. 6 root afflictions, such as attachment. 20 secondary delusions or afflictions, klesha, such as belligerence and so forth. And 4 changeable mental factors, not 2, regret and so forth. So 5 and 5 is 10. 11 more virtuous factors makes 21. 6 root delusions makes 27. 20 secondary makes 47. And then 4 more, 47 and 4 is 51, right? So just to remember those, you can even debate with one another, say, okay, like in debate, often the debate would start off that one person is asking the questions, would say, it follows that you don't know the 5 omnipresent, or you don't know the divisions of the 51 mental factors. And the other person would say, duh, that means yes, I agree. Or teacher, it means why. And so you say show, and then that would mean you have to explain what they are. And you say there are 5 omnipresent mental factors, 5 object ascertaining mental factors, 11 virtuous mental factors, and so forth. Later, when we talk about those divisions, we'll ask you to memorize, and it'll be a good exercise. Even though you might think I won't remember this all my life, there will be really very great benefit in knowing what are the 5 omnipresent mental factors? What are the 5 object ascertaining mental factors? What are the 11 virtuous mental factors? What are the 6 root delusions? Very important to recognize them in your own meditation. You know, what are their defining characteristics and so forth. And in knowing that also, we'll talk about their antidotes. And then what are the 20 secondary delusions? What are the afflictions? What are the 4 changeable mental factors? Okay, so memorize those divisions. And if you can read from where we stopped up through the first 2 of the omnipresent mental factors, or let's first say the first 3. So feeling, discrimination, which discrimination is on page 18 or 19, I'm not sure, I can't tell from my, I've got it black here. 19. Oh, see, the numbers are in the bottom. And then intention, the third one. So read those first 3. If you can, read the first 5, read all 5 for next time, and then we will be able to go a little more fast through that, a little faster. Okay.
Discuss anything in particular in the discussion group?
See, well, some of you may have experience to answer questions that are qualms, that are thorns for some people. And this first time we've just basically spent some time on motivation, the introduction, so forth, and mainly talked about mind, the difference between mind and mental factors. So if you can center on that, the difference between primary mind and mental factors, and yeah, that'll be good. Okay, Wendy's last question.
Where does naming the object, is that discrimination or is that something else?
Naming of the object comes about as a result of discrimination. So we'll talk about that next time. Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
we're just beginning. So I'm to split, right? Okay. Thanks for your attention. I hope you weren't too bored. I know a couple of people got up and left. Maybe they didn't know what to expect. Like I said, Geshe Tekchok used to say, studying this kind of material, even though it's kind of hard and it's hard to get your mind around it, it's sometimes in many ways more beneficial of doing a lot of meditation, a 3-month retreat. And this will profit you very much later when you study other texts, so I recommend it. When I taught at Land of Medicine Buddha some years ago, we talked about various subjects, these same subjects, including the Heart Sutra. Then His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Mountain View and taught the Heart Sutra, in a very beautiful, way, just like over 2 or 3 days. And some of the students came back and they said, "Oh, thank you so much, George. I actually understood what he was talking about because of the terminology. We're familiar. We've got a little bit background of all these things, and it made it so much richer. If I hadn't have had this kind of background, it would have just, gone over my head." so to speak. So I would, really, how to say, relish, would rejoice in your sticking to it if you can, from some time on. So are there some, before the speaker leaves, do you say some other prayers, or do we just, okay. So I will leave you to that. My pleasure. And I've got the text. I sent it to myself on my iPad. Also, I could recommend, and maybe I will send you, because you said you didn't have Jeffrey Hopkins' text, or you do have it digitized. So in Jeffrey Hopkins' text, Meditation on Emptiness, some of you may have the written copy. In that text, the section on mind and mental factors, you'll see when he talks about the sources, comes from this very text. And he synthesizes that. Sometimes it's not all of the text, but in his very precise language, it's very, very nice to complement this. So you might want to excise, if you know how to take from that PDF, just those pages and make it available to people, mind and mental factors. And that will be very helpful. And you can kind of then compare Suji's translation and that, and get a little more flavor. Because he, especially about discrimination, in this text it just says discrimination comes about by knowing after aggregation. What does that mean? Well, in his text he mentions after aggregating the sense power, the object, and what's the third thing when you talk about the three conditions necessary for a condition for consciousness to arise? The previous moment of consciousness. When these three things come together or aggregate, then the object is known. So his explanation in that text can complement this a little bit. So thank you very much.